Jung struggles immensely then with the sort of scientific worldview that he had donned. His great problem was that he had become sort of a word thinker. He'd become quite stiff in his attitude. He even says at one point that when he was younger, he saw fantasy, that part of your mind that fantasizes, as a waste of time. He saw it as like a trivial, pointless thing. Now, his struggle then was that when all this like profound stuff happens, it sort of cuckolds that ego of his. It cuckolds that part of his mind. It really kind of puts the spanner in the works about the idea that the word thinking mind is sufficient or sophisticated, you know. And there was a sort of feeling within him that if he tried to stay within his ego, it's like on a psychedelic trip. If you try to stay within your ego and stay within your word thinking mind, and while this overwhelming experience of the blunt force of the unconscious comes to reach you, and this anima comes up and filling you with all this bad energy, if you try to resist this and keep it within your framework, you're going to get destroyed, man. Like, it's going to break you. It might send you crazy. It might send you psychotic. It might hurt you in some sense psychologically. And so Jung sort of surrenders to this, and he gives up his ability to know. He gives up on the zeitgeist, as he says. He gives up on the sort of collective place he found himself in. He gives up on this Darwinism and this Freudianism and the scientism of his day, and he just goes all out. He goes mask off, gloves off. He's like, all right, fuck it, let's go wild. Like, let's go all the way to the end. And he starts to speak in a way that is just you just can't talk anymore. He starts to speak to his soul. And this is what anima means, is Latin for soul. He starts to speak to his soul. My soul, where are you? Do you hear me? I speak, I call you. Are you there? I have returned, I am here again. I have shaken the dust of all the lands from my feet, and I have come to you. I am with you. After long years of wandering, I have come to you again. Should I tell you everything I have seen, experienced, and drunk in? Now, this is very fascinating in his frame. I know I'm sort of killing the magic a little bit, bringing in the right hemisphere, but play along with me for a bit. If you think about this idea of, should I tell you everything I have seen, it's almost like a companion, yeah, or maybe a companion that maybe has been there for a long time, but he's sort of forgotten about. Some type of guardian angel, some type of fellow, some type of partner in crime, a life partner, these type of things. A very romantic thing. And this would make a lot of sense, because I guess the right hemisphere is on the other side of your head. But look, let's not go too far into that. And because what he says next is, I thought and spoke much of the soul, a soul logician, a psychologist. I thought and spoke much of the soul. I knew and any learned words for her. I had judged her and turned her into a scientific object. And this is precisely what I'm trying to avoid in this whole talk, because I realize there's a sort of warning in that, like, I've turned her into a scientific object. I've turned her into a piece of hardware that you can study. But she's more than that. The anima is more than that to Carl. He takes it big serious. He does not joke around here. Now, I do believe, though, that this experience has the fingerprints of the anima, or of the right hemisphere, all over it. I think there's something, it has to have a role here somehow. And what I think might have happened is that Jung actually broke through into a new interface. He figured out, he was introduced into a new way to use the hardware that he was given. He was still quite unconscious of maybe the actual functioning of it. He didn't know the neuroscience of it, but he sort of got a snap about, like, this is actually closer to how this stuff actually works. This is the more accurate view of this. He was getting almost like the little applications you're supposed to use. Maybe the anima is one application, and then the shadow is another application. And if you click these buttons properly, then you'll use the hardware very, very well. Now, it's a very interesting way of thinking, because when you actually look at you go into more detail about this right hemisphere, you start to see more stuff that suits this. But of course, it's not quite as straightforward as you just have like these two blobs of hardware, these two magic pieces of jelly, and that's how it works. Like, the brain is quite a complex system. There's an underbrain as well, if you want, a lower brain, and then there's like all this stuff going on. But obviously these two big lumps of jelly have a massive influence on how it works. Now, one of the most interesting ways to get the sort of comprehensive view of this is to look at dreams. And dreams are very significant for this, because Jung started to speak about his soul and where to find her, is that you find her in the dregs of my thought, my dreams and my fantasies. The one thing that he had dismissed and perhaps ignored back in his day, he now realized that there was during his moments of fantasizing and dreaming, there was something speaking to him. Now, something that I came across earlier in my life when I was getting into all this stuff is how do dreams work? It's a very, very complicated process. And an idea that I always thought was quite interesting is that dreams are actually a very, very raw model of the order of thinking. And what does that mean? Remember that 19th century idea where you had, Napoleon or Beethoven, the genius, and he'd invent the great work. Nietzsche would sit down and plan out Zarathustra, which in practical experience always turns out to be writer's block. You're trying to perfect what you're doing and you end up overthinking and you kill off the creativity and you become sterile. Whereas the great artists often talk about surrendering and something coming over them, a muse appearing, and Michelangelo saying, I see an angel trapped in the stone that I have to free. It's not like, hey, I'm going to measure out all the connotations, the contours of all this type of stuff, and none of that stuff. And so the model in that way of thinking, that perfectionist, wrong way of thinking, I'd say, is that, it's a sort of thought originates in the rational procedural mind and whatnot. But of course, it's well known that our subconscious drives a lot of our decisions, as they often say nowadays. And even when you look at dreams start to take on that appearance. There's this weird unconscious to more conscious process, like a funnel, if you will. Down in the bottom of your brain, you get this REM sleep is triggered by the very, very ancient parts of it, and it's really, really grounded in the body impulse experience, the sparking of the bottom brain. Now, you might remember Jordan Peterson mentioning that one hypothesis that people have proposed, and there is evidence for this, pretty decent evidence for this, is that when you're having a dream, what's happening is the right hemisphere is like talking to the left hemisphere in crazy symbol language, because the right hemisphere doesn't actually have words. It doesn't have a Broca's area. You have a Broca's area on your left side. You get hit by a pipe there, you won't be able to talk anymore. You get hit by the pipe on the other side, and you probably will be fine. You might have a headache though, which probably will be fine. Okay, and so the right brain doesn't have an ability to talk. It's quite weird, but it can communicate. Now, there's a difference. It can't use speech, but it can communicate. And the way it communicates is sort of like it paints pictures, if you will. So it's like that friend of yours, who sits in the corner and doesn't talk, and then flashes you pictures of stuff to try to communicate its feelings. Imagine how weird your experience was if I said to you, you can't use words. You can only paint and stuff. You can only use hand movement and gesture and whatnot. And you turn into quite a funky person to be around. And sort of what the right hemisphere's problem is. It's I'm such a damn genius. I know so much stuff. Just fecking Egypt over on the other side of the head, across the hall. He just wants words. He doesn't understand my interpretive dance that I'm doing. So that's its challenge. It's always trying to speak in a more symbolic language, if you will, a more imagistic way. And that's exactly what dreams appear like, aren't they? When you think about it, it's almost like, your left hemisphere, your little ego there goes to sleep, and it's like, all right, sweet, nice one, I'll tip down, and then knock on the door, and it's like, what the fuck is that? Oh, it's the right brain again. And it's just a cat wearing pants and stuff, and you're like, what are you talking about? You're so strange. Why do you always show up at night when I'm trying to go to sleep? Who the fuck are you? What are you doing? What are you trying to tell me? This is just make more sense. What are you doing? And then it does all this crazy stuff, and it takes you to the astral plane and stuff like this, and talks to you about, it says Boyo alert is the meaning of the universe, and you're like, well, what are you talking about? This is insane. Leave me alone.